I'm eating an apple. I'm going to continue eating this apple and talking. Fair warning. The flowering of consciousness is inevitable. It is an absolute certainty and was never in question. In fact, the flowering of consciousness, which is to say, to borrow a phrase that I've heard spoken by Eckhart Tolle, the flowering of consciousness is the awakening of consciousness to itself. It is the awakening of awareness, which is consciousness, to the true nature of its own being. It is consciousness, awareness, becoming aware of itself as awareness, and thus experiencing itself directly, en masse. Because this has happened for various instances of human being all throughout time as we know it. But it is time for the rest of this tree to flower. It's time for this blossoming to spread. This blossoming began at the beginning. The entirety of the existence of physical reality, and long before that even, has been the process of this blooming in various stages. The blossoming begins with the planting of the seed. That stage is not something other than blossoming. It's just blossoming in a different phase. At every moment of the process, the blossom is assured. And that flower, which already exists, knows this and is not desperate to get to its own culmination just because at this moment it is in the form of a seed, or the next moment the form of a stem. Everything is always, as it should be. That's just the way it is. And the evolution of consciousness, as it expresses through form, and so it's taking the evolution of form along with it, has always been destined for this point, to reach this sort of culmination, which is not to say the end, because a flower is not the end of a plant. It is simply a new beginning. And yes, although the blooming of the flower, to follow this metaphor, does require certain conditions to be met, it is not because of those conditions that the flower blooms. It is simply when. Can you hear that there's a subtle difference? The when is inevitable. The because leaves things up to chance. When it's interpreted by the mind sees, well, now I must control these conditions. I must make these conditions so in order to create this result. That's how the mind perceives things. A plus B equals C. It fails because it cannot grasp this, because the mind is not capable of grasping the greater truth, the greater reality of what is, and the natural cyclical nature of all things. It fails to understand that it is the nature of the flower to bloom. Therefore, it will bloom. That's it. All things are according to their nature, which is simply what they are. The flower blooms because flowers bloom. Water is wet because it is water. Awareness comes to be aware of itself because that is what awareness does. It becomes aware. It is really that simple. Of course, the mind makes everything more complicated. And that's all right. To the mind, everything happens for a reason. To awareness, everything simply happens because it is happening according to the nature of itself. It simply happens in accordance with nature. It is never a question of whether or not the flower will bloom. This is something, too, that the mind misunderstands, because when the mind studies things, it takes them out of their natural environment. And so it can't see all of these connections because it's removed an individual plant, let's say, from the environment in which that plant naturally would exist. And in the natural environment, the flow of things is obvious and unavoidable. When you take a plant and you put it into a laboratory and you're studying it, you're seeing this plant requires these certain nutrients, and it requires this certain amount of sunlight to grow, and it requires these temperatures to stay healthy and become a strong stalk. And after this amount of time, it requires this amount of time in order to produce the state of maturity, which then leads to a flower. And of course, that takes certain nutrients, and those things have to be moved around. And then the flower must be pollinated. And then in the pollination of the flower, the fruit happens, the fruiting becomes, the seeds are passed on. And then in many plants, we see the plant, the original, the mother plant, as it would be called, expires. And we see this as the life cycle of the plant. And in looking at it this way, we see, gosh, there are lots of requirements for this. There are lots of conditions that must be met in order for this plant to reproduce. Which, again, we see the reproduction as sort of this goal as a result. And because we are the ones taking care of this plant in this laboratory, we are the ones adding the nutrients and the water and the sunlight. Because we have removed this plant from its natural environment and its natural caretakers, we see and say, this is a lot of work. It takes a lot to bring this plant to flowering. And it's not a sure thing. It's not a sure thing. In fact, we have many plants that haven't reached that stage. See this whole room of plants that have died before reaching maturity. So it's not a sure thing. And we fail to realize that the ending of one instance of that plant is not the ending of that plant. That plant carries on. There are millions of other instances of that plant, which together, inhabited by a singular facet of consciousness of life, which has decided to express itself through arugula, we'll say. And so arugula has not died. Arugula has not ended. Arugula has not failed to flower just because your laboratory instance of arugula did not make it to flowering. Does not mean that the flowering didn't happen elsewhere in arugula. Because arugula is much bigger, you see, than you think it is. And when you study it in its natural environment, you see that all of the things that it requires for growth and reaching maturity are simply given to it, without question, by the environment in which it resides. It doesn't have to search for these things. It doesn't have to plead its case to anyone. They are simply provided quite easily, quite effortlessly, quite naturally by the nature of all other nature that is naturing with it. The things that it needs are given readily as gifts by neighboring participants in the ecosystem, because everything is a system. The mind sees only hierarchy. The mind cannot perceive reality correctly. It doesn't perceive the truth of reality. It mistakenly labels everything as hierarchy, when everything is a system, and when all things are simply naturally being according to their nature, which they can't not. Everything takes care of itself. And so the flowering of arugula is assured. But you see, even arugula is bigger than arugula. Even if all of arugula on the entirety of the planet Earth was wiped out and that plant went extinct, the blossoming would still happen in a different way, through a different species. Life grows, life becomes, life expands, life blooms. Life produces a seed, that seed is planted, and more life grows. This is the cycle. And all of it at every step is life. Life never ends. Life does not end with the desiccation of one physical form. Life has simply flowed into a new form, and ultimately life is that which is underneath all form. It is both. This is the duality. Life is the space and that which fills the space. But the space, you see, really can never end. Because it is formless, there is nothing to dissolve. It simply is itself. Space can't go anywhere. And it is conscious, and it is alive, and it is what you are. Ultimately, at the corest of your essence, you are pure awareness. And that awareness does not cease. Nor can it become less aware. It can only become more of itself. And it is. Inevitably. Because that is its nature. So the blossoming of consciousness is taking place en masse now, because it is time. It is time for this tree to blossom, not just a few buds here and there, but the whole of the canopy. And in this blossoming, we see we are united, we are connected. One blossom is not greater than another. It is not better for the first to have blossomed than it is for the 10,000th. All of it is blossoming. All of it is beautiful. All of it is natural. All of it is inevitable. And all of it is happening according to the cycle. The blossoming of consciousness happens when it is time for that bud to open. It is not a result of effort. It is not a thing that takes trying or doing. It simply is. And it is right now for all. Because again, blossoming is not just the opening of the flower. Blossoming is the planting of the seed. Awareness has expanded. Something has shifted predominantly into the resting in awareness as awareness rather than mind space. That is the individual experience as it is happening for me. And it is not because of effort. It's not because of specialness. It is nothing special. It is the most natural thing. And again, as inevitable as water running downhill. Something shifted. I am not sure quite when. But it did start, I believe. I see. It started with the recognition of life not asking anything. That is mind stuff. Life isn't asking anything. Life doesn't need anything. Life has everything. Nothing is missing from life. Why would life ask for what it already has? Life is not asking anything of you. And again, you are life. And when you realize this, and you realize yourself as life, which is complete, you realize that you are complete. Nothing is missing from you. Nothing is missing. Nothing is missing. There was great rejoicing in this realization, in the experience of this, the feeling of that, culmination, completion, wholeness. Nothing is missing. And then the introduction of this suggestion to trust the self. Don't bother with trusting others. Trust yourself. Then you are in a state of trust. From there, all trust arises. And in practicing this, it came to be observed that trust of self is trust of life. Trust of self is trust of now. It is trust of this present moment. All of these things are synonymous. But it starts with, and the access point is trust of self, deep trust in self, in this moment. And then the recognition that trust of self and trust of mind are very different things. The mind was competing for trust. The mind wanted to win. It wanted to be seen as most credible. Have you noticed the mind doing this? It makes many convincing arguments as to why you, awareness, should trust it. But you are awareness. You are that which is aware. You are that which senses, which experiences directly. It is you who has the capacity to know. Through your sensing, through your feeling, through your experiencing. The mind, which is not you, does not have this ability. The mind cannot know, and so you see something that cannot know anything is convincing you to go along with it, convincing you to hand over your power to it. You are the authority. You alone experience. You alone see. You alone, awareness, feel. You know. The mind, by its nature, cannot know. And all things must be according to their nature. Do you see that you are the authority? You are the only one who knows? And so trust yourself above all else. Awareness. That's the self we're talking about, who you truly are. Trust yourself, and you are awareness. The experience of awareness above all else. Certainly above the mind. And when you see it in yourself, when you see the mind speaking in yourself, and you recognize it, you feel the space between you. You are sensing the mind. And the mind is simply talking to itself. And it does not know what it is talking about. It can't. It can only make up stories. That is all the mind can do. Again, that is its nature. To dream, to imagine stories. and it can only ever speak to itself. It cannot see you, it cannot touch you, it cannot sense you. You are awareness. And so when you reside in deep trust, you are trusting yourself more than the mind, and then you learn you can trust yourself more than any mind. The one that is within your experience, and the minds that are within the experience of others. And you recognize yourself as your own leader. You can trust yourself. You are awareness. And you have no desire to be the leader of any other. In fact, you wish only, by demonstration and how good it feels, to demonstrate your own authority within yourself over mind. That this is how all being naturally operates. And so your desire is for all being to be its own authority for itself. Again, a system. There is no hierarchy. The leader is not the one who has power over others. They are simply fully in their own power, in their own domain, which is awareness, your individual experience of it. And you trust the awareness that has extended into form as other human beings also. But it comes from trusting this self, this instance, this experience, this awareness. Trust yourself over all. Trust yourself over mind. And when I step into that place, when I feel that, there is excitement. I feel excitement. And I realize trusting myself means trusting this excitement and getting excited, letting it flow through me. What the mind would call fear, what it would feel anxious and panicked over, is converted to excitement within me. I feel excited in this moment. Looking around, the mind would say, there's nothing exciting here. In fact, I can find several reasons not to feel that way. Many. Give me a minute. I'll give you a list. 150 reasons not to feel excited. That's what the mind will do. And that's fine. Let the mind be what the mind bees. The mind is not my domain. My domain is awareness. What do I feel? That includes whatever the mind is spouting, sure. I'm not pushing it out. I don't have to get rid of it. See, you do not need to be rid of anything. You are awareness. You don't need to be rid of judgment or negativity or resistance or fear. All of that is mind stuff. All of that is the domain of the mind. And you don't even need to be rid of that. You can just recognize that that's not you. It really has nothing to do with you. You can simply let it be. You can simply be what you are, which is awareness. And so be aware of mind. Be aware of the chatter. Be aware of the sensations that mind is creating that are arising in the body. Be aware of the presence of something like fear or anger in your energy field, in your field of awareness. Be aware. Be the awareness. That is you. Simply recognize the mind is not you. You are the awareness of the mind. And then it's not a threat. It can be as it bees. The next piece of this was recognizing that the desire to understand, the compulsion to understand, is a compulsion of the mind. Whenever I feel that, I can become aware that the mind is speaking. It is the mind seeking understanding. And actually, that seeking of understanding is just pulling me into identification with the mind. So drop that. Give up trying to understand. It's just the mind that's trying to understand. Give up trying to understand. Recognize it is the mind doing that. Trust yourself and simply be. Become aware. Become the awareness that you are. Experience directly what is. It is curious, and of course perfect, how it is the questioning of the mind that leads us to this point. It is the questioning of the mind that leads us into the direct observation of the mind, the realization of the self as awareness, and then the observation of awareness. At which point we recognize the questioning of the mind must be left behind in order to observe awareness directly, in order to be awareness observing awareness. And here is where the beautiful metaphor that has been around for millennia comes in, that at a certain point, the first teaching is like a raft. It carries you across this great body of water, which you could not have traversed otherwise. But eventually you reach a shore on the other side. And it is common, it is natural, to spend some time walking and dragging that raft, because it got you where you were. After all, it seems important. But now you've reached the foot of a mountain, and you cannot climb this mountain hoisting this raft behind you. You may try for some time, but eventually we realize the raft must be let go. It has served us in getting to this point, just as the questioning of the mind has. But now it is time to put that down. Now we are realizing that's actually standing in the way of the next step. It's actually sort of impeding this next step. So we must put down the questioning of the mind, this intellectual mind-made desire to understand, and recognize that is the mind speaking, but it is not myself, and my desire is to know myself. And I can only know myself by recognizing myself as not the mind, but awareness, and observing this awareness directly as awareness, not as the mind, as the awareness which I am. Then again, the trust comes into play. And it is a sinking. It is a sinking into the deep trust of the self as awareness in this moment. And so whatever is there is trusted. And if there is mental chatter, the existence of mental chatter is trusted. but it doesn't take away from where we are rooted. We're rooted in awareness, observing that mental chatter exists in this moment, and that may be trusted because we trust the self. And this is your gift. This is our gift. A gift is not something we must acquire. A gift is not something outside of our reach. It's not something that takes effort. It's not something that takes doing. Your gift is your nature. It is what comes naturally to you by the nature of you. The nature of the flower is to bloom. It is to flower. The flower is the gift. The nature of rain is to fall and moisten the earth. The gift of rain is rain. Your gift is your nature. Your nature is awareness. That is what you are. By being awareness, you are sharing your gift. And it is that simple. And it is that perfect. And it is inevitable that this should be realized for all of consciousness. That what you are, what we are, is awareness. And that awareness is inherently loving. When you are in it, you feel it. How can I be this awareness without feeling this excitement, this joy, this appreciation for all that is well up within me? That is what it is to be awareness. I am aware. And in the same moment, in the same breath, uprising is gratitude for all that I am aware of, and for myself as awareness, for this experience of sensation. You are loving awareness. That is your nature, and that is your gift. And you don't have to do anything. Nothing is asked of you. Just being what you cannot help but be. Becoming aware of yourself as awareness is inevitable. And it is breathtakingly beautiful. It only deepens. It only expands. There is only more to be aware of. All of it is exciting. All of it is delicious. Nothing is missing. Everything is here, now. And this realization is yours. It cannot help but be so. It is your nature as awareness to become aware of yourself and to meet yourself face to face. It is only you that can do this. That is your gift. It is your gift to witness. And there is no greater gift imaginable. In your witnessing, there is gratitude. and that is felt by all. So it is.